Welcome to Behavior Health Today. I'm your host, Dr. Graham Taylor. My guest today is Jon Steele. Jon is a licensed marriage and family therapist who has focused his private practice on treating high-performance clients, including athletes and professionals. With personal experience as a former collegiate athlete, Jon combines the complexities of the athlete's experience with the performance of professional life. His experiences and his specialties include treating anxiety, trauma, grief, addiction, and building mental fitness. Whether working with athletes or high-achieving professionals, he helps his clients combat shame, build healthy coping strategies, and increase self-compassion amidst high-pressure environments. Today, we brought Jon onto the show to talk about working with athletes who experience injuries, who are recovering from trauma, and the life transition out of sports. Jon, it's so nice to have you here. Welcome to the show.
I appreciate it, Graham. Yeah, excited to be able to dig into some of these topics and just be able to go from there. So
Looking forward to it with you as well. You're a pretty good sized guy, and I understand you were an athlete yourself. Share with us your sports history and how this led you into your current practice with high performers.
yeah, that one is, I got the privilege to enjoy just an athletic career, including collegiate athletics. So baseball was my sport
Where'd you play?
from So I pitched. Yeah, I pitched in
Okay.
college and did that. I played baseball right since like T-ball,
Yeah.
age 4, right, all the way through. And I just love sports just in general. So I grabbed on to just about anything. But so a big part of my story, is the sports piece, is the
Mm.
ability to compete, learning so much from it, and now kind of having a different perspective as well as going through and, whether it's sitting with clients, going from schooling as a marriage and family therapist and what that's brought to it. And then a lot of just self-reflection and evaluation, and walking through that. And so now kind of combining a lot of those has kind of brought me to where I am today, and the continued growth. And so, but being able to play was absolutely amazing. I loved it.
It almost gets a little cliche-ish to say, but you learn so much through sports. It doesn't mean you can't learn a lot from being in an orchestra or
Mhm.
being part of a club, but you know, being an athlete, you know that there are so many lessons that you learn from sports: discipline, self-sacrifice, postponement of gratification, teamwork, denying yourself and working for a larger purpose, et cetera, goal setting, all those things that are
Yeah.
just so applicable to life in general. We're going to be focusing a little bit today on the side that's oftentimes a little tougher when someone goes through an injury and how to get through those things, and also the whole process of transitioning out of sports. But I think often we don't fully appreciate the degree of pressure on elite athletes. We can even say high performance in other areas as well. And this can, as I'm saying, can extend to high performance in other fields as well. And the training loads and the performance demands, the suck it up mantras that we all have to live with under to function in many ways, and the win at all cost mentalities. And it presents a unique concern for the mental health among athletes that oftentimes doesn't get understood or really mined down into to be explored. And then injury can hit. And this can impact one's athletic career, including one's personal identity and self-value that is so wrapped up in their sport. And the loss of their sport and of their identity is truly an impactful experience. Help us understand some of the challenges in your work that you see athletes facing after an injury and in their recovery process.
Yeah. Yeah, the injury form, I think one of the things I've kind of recognized, and I think both the topics you're bringing up, one is the injury, kind of this immediate change, this event, that happens. And then I think we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more too about just transition.
Yes.
And recently what's been helpful for me to really get out there and wrap my own mind around is, the idea that change, that happens, that injury is an event,
Yes.
transition is a process. that both of those are different and they have their own impact. So I mean, when we're speaking, exactly what you're mentioning, for I'll get a little personal with me because that's kind of how I roll a little bit. But for me, I went through a pretty severe arm injury.
Mm.
Through college, it was right in the middle of my collegiate career. I remember it to this day,
Yeah, I
to
bet.
the batter, to the pitch, you know. Um, I'm not sure, Graham, how familiar you are with baseball, but for me, one of my go-to pitches was a changeup,
Mm.
right? And so in throwing a changeup, I threw a circle change
Mm.
like so,
Mm-hmm.
and part of that movement was when I would throw it, I would turn. Well, not knowing over time, that put some stress on my elbow, and so
Mm.
sure enough, in a game, my elbow ligament snapped as I threw that circle change.
Yeah.
Um, and it was one of
It's
those.
funny how aggressive a changeup actually is.
Oh man,
It's an
right?
aggressive pitch. Yeah.
You're replicating, right? I mean, we could probably go into it. I hear it in your voice a little bit. We could get into that dynamic, but it is right. It's one of those, and going through the injury itself. I recall calling like basically walking around the mound, right, and being like, okay, something's off. I remember calling my coach over and saying, hey, I think I'm done for the day. I remember
Mm.
going up to the trainer and being like, at the worst, this is probably just, some tendonitis that I've worked through before. A couple weeks, I'm out on the field again. Then hearing like whispers of, "Mm, this could be more. This could be surgery." This ended up being Tommy John surgery, is what ended
Mm.
up being for me. Um, which in itself, I think in the injury portion that you're referencing, there is some of the immediate symptoms, that what I would say you naturally go through, but
Yeah.
acknowledging those natural symptoms, I would say is probably one of the first things that I do with clients, but also that I had to work through myself.
Natural
Just the
symptoms. Say more about
mhm,
that.
right natural symptoms. So things
Yeah.
like, for instance, you're in shock, right? This is if this happened on the field, if this happened somewhere, you are in shock and you are moving through
Yeah.
that to
Yeah.
get to a place of then being able to make next steps.
Mm-hmm.
And so I recall that, like there was a dizzy room that was happening in that trainer room, right?
Yeah.
I can just pull myself back into that and recognize, then a lot of it is the what ifs, right, that start to kick in,
Right.
and so as you're walking through the physical,
Yeah.
not only the arm injury, but if we're focusing on the mental health aspect of it,
Yeah.
you're talking about the impact of what anxiety does to your body, and as you're walking through those symptoms, one thing I recognized is being able to acknowledge those without judgment is a huge part of it. Is just being able to say, this is what I'm going through in
Mm.
this moment. This is
Mm.
what I'm experiencing. Not that this is what I shouldn't be experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't go down that road.
Mm-hmm.
It's really this is me. This is where I'm at.
Right.
And the ability to accept that moment
Yeah.
is probably one of the biggest things that I start with in regards to walking somebody through injury.
I like that idea. It's almost a subject object relationship
Mm-hmm.
where,
Mm-hmm.
the subject is us and the object is the experience, and how we get to hold a grounded sense of ourselves, but we're looking at something else, something that we're in without having to be so wrapped up in it.
Yep.
In those moments, a lot can come with it. There can be, the loss, maybe some of the rejection you're talking about, maybe things like anxiety, or maybe even one kind of getting down on themselves, maybe even a shame-based, stance that they might start taking. Talk about some of the things that can be not so ideal in terms of
Mm-hmm.
one's response.
Yeah, I think you hit on definitely a bunch of those. And I think one of them to pinpoint is really probably the shame.
Mm.
When the shame piece can set in, and someone once told me, gave me kind of some quick definitions, which I appreciated, the difference between something that you have regret over, the idea of I wish this was different, has a
Mm.
feel to it. Guilt has I made a mistake,
Yeah.
but it stays at the mistake.
Yeah.
Shame takes it to I made a mistake and I am that mistake,
I am the mistake. Yeah.
right? Like it takes it to
That's
that
huge.
inward piece. And
Yeah.
that's right. Like when you get into that shame,
Yeah.
That's when I think a lot of the stuck can happen.
Yeah.
Through trainings and working with a lot of trauma, a big piece of that is really being able to allow people to move out of the stuck that they're in. One of the definitions I kind of appreciate about trauma is fight, flight, freeze, get stuck in your body. And one of the processes is you're just trying to release, and get out of that stuck.
Yeah.
Um, and I take that one with me, right? Whether it's working with, athletes and injury, and other scenarios, that happen, with people, in that way. But that stuck piece and shame, I think that's the one that I recognize one of the most.
I think what's hard around shame, and I love that definition, guilt is what I do, shame is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And this injury, this event can very easily, because so much of our identity is wrapped up in what we do
Yep.
and who we see ourselves becoming, particularly those that, high level performers like yourself.
Yep.
Our identity, how we're seen, how people see us, how we think, what we do during the week. Our week is usually as good as our last weekend performance type of thing.
Yep. Yep.
And it becomes, and we look forward to things. Everything is highlighted and focused by that. And all of a sudden that changes. And we begin to think, well, what does this say about me now? And we begin to unknowingly, slowly kind of go down that slippery slope of potentially going down a shame path, don't we?
Yep. Yep. Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, I think you named it right there. When you are in that spot where shame is really kind of just enveloping you. I picture it sometimes as this darkness, that can come in, and what you're trying to do to work towards what I would say is bringing light, to that darkness. And
Yeah.
a lot of that has to do with, I think, exactly what you're speaking to, the way that the connection of performance based. I
Yeah.
am good because I performed good,
That's right.
versus the separation, and
Yeah.
what happens there. And I mean, talk about how difficult that is. As if we stick in athletics, you are constantly critiqued.
That's right.
You are constantly judged, and rightfully so in some ways, I would say in a healthy way, because results are
Sure.
on the scoreboard.
Sure.
Wins or losses are up there. Stats are up
Yeah.
there for the
Yeah.
reasons that they are.
There has to be that point to it. It's not like, oh, it can't be all that, but there's a part of it that realistically has to be that, but it can't be
Yeah.
all of that.
Yes, I love
Yeah.
that. Yep, I
Yeah.
love that, right? Like that separation of who
Hmm.
you are versus what you do. I
Yeah.
think, it took me a while at times. I still struggle with that, right?
Yeah.
But, it took me a while to really separate that one for myself.
Yeah.
And as I started to do that, and this was, post collegiate career,
Yeah.
looking back, going through some of the journey that I have to where I am today, as I've seen that, there has been much more of a freeing experience,
Yeah.
to where shame, right, can just hold on to you and grip you in these ways and create that stuck, versus what it means to really be able to separate, and kind of experience more freedom. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I really appreciate that description. You're talking about, I think a couple of things come to mind: shame versus guilt, who I am versus what I've done. And this idea also maybe extending it a wee bit to a couple of areas. We look at goals, and we can, and sports tend to be kind of performance based, outcome based goals. You're as good as how many points you scored. You're as good as how many strikes you threw. You're as good as your, ERA, whatever it may be. That's performance based, and we can't always control that, but we can control maybe our effort based goals. How
Yes.
focused were you? How did you practice? How did you follow through on what your mindset was for that game? So those are things we can control. Performance based, we can't control. Effort based, we always can for the most part. But you're also talking about this idea of kind of the locus of control, what's within our control and what's outside of our control. And when you talk about shame versus guilt, sometimes the guilt is, I did something, but it was outside of my control, and I have to accept that. So that's that internal external locus of control piece right there. And these kind of seem
Yeah.
to go together in many ways, don't they?
Oh yeah, definitely they do. I love what you're talking about in regards to, when it comes to effort versus outcome,
Yeah.
and I think really being able to bring somebody into that space of effort,
Hmm.
that's that separation. That's
Yeah.
that separation, that the outcome is there. And like you're saying, outcome is pretty much out of your control,
Yes.
in that sense, as best as you can do.
Yeah.
Um, and so, when you're speaking about that spot, when it comes to outcome itself and the control piece, one of the exercises that I've run through before, a helpful tool is just this idea of prioritizing control. What's in your control and what's out of your control.
Mm-hmm.
There's this little graph, that I've used before, a 4 quadrant, and one of them, says control. And really, you're trying to simplify it as much as possible and just answer the question yes or no.
Yeah.
The other part on the bottom is essentially time, the
Mm.
duration. Yes, this is in my control, and yes, it needs to be done today.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing. And then being able to eliminate for that period of time the other 3 boxes, right? So you're trying to stick it in that one box that says yes, and it's important, you know? And I think that tool I've recognized in its simplicity, it's something that says, hey, let's be able to take a breath, settle in, and focus in on that one quadrant.
Yeah.
you know, Allow the others for this moment to move their way through and let go of those.
Right.
And let's get into, that one section right there.
I think that
Um,
idea of kind of right sizing reality
mm,
can be very freeing because a lot
yeah,
of times as athletes, you don't limit yourself. You think about what can be, and you think outside of the box a lot, which is a necessary piece too.
yeah,
But like you said, there are times when we need to think not necessarily inside the box in an inhibited way, but sometimes right sizing reality is actually very freeing. We don't have to put the same pressures on ourselves. We get to be in a moment with the reality based that, well, this is what it is. And what kind of effort can I bring to this? And, as you talk about the effort around this, I know that an athlete's mindset is everything in their performance success and recovery,
yep,
both mentally and physically.
yep,
When you think about it, it's another effort based opportunity
mm,
for people
mm-hmm.
to see that,
Love
hey,
it.
this is what you did in your sports. This gets to be the same kind of effort. How do you help folks mentally and emotionally prepare to enter that recovery journey, maybe even in an effort based way?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great point, and a great question in regards to focusing in when somebody is leading into, the recovery process.
Yeah.
I think, a part of that process I've recognized is, a connection with the acceptance and reality of grief for a
Mm-hmm.
portion of time that, you have, and the reality is you have lost
Yes.
something, during that time. And
It's
it's
the
not knowing
proverbial.
this.
It's kind of the proverbial Kubler Ross's stages, isn't it?
Yep,
Even after acceptance, there's going to be a transcendent period, even in recovery. But it's almost framing it like that is what you're suggesting.
yeah, yeah, big time, right? That model, the Kubler-Ross, I think,
Yeah.
being able to bring that at times in front of people to give them a little structure
Yeah.
in that moment, right?
Yeah.
When everything feels lost.
Yes.
And I think that's a part of, that moment when people are leading into, recovery, of taking a moment and saying, hey, it's okay
Yeah.
to acknowledge this,
Right.
that loss has happened. I'll throw in a big and, right? And, we are going to work on some practices, to be able to move you through, and in this case, mentally and emotionally, the recovery process.
Right.
Um, and so one of those, things that I would point towards is more the probably twofold. One is the practice of grounding.
Mm.
How is it that you are going to consistently ground yourself amidst overwhelming moments? Because those are going to happen. You are going to feel overwhelmed in this process. There is the natural thing of anxiousness that's going to kick in, the what ifs, the out of your control. So, what is it that you do to ground yourself,
Yes.
to pull yourself from that moment of overwhelm into a place where you can say, okay, let's take this moment.
Yes.
You notice already for me, I naturally go to
You got to
breath,
pause. Yeah, you got to pause.
right?
So you're talking about pausing in that moment to stop an oftentimes unconscious process that can take you down its road versus you pausing for a moment and choosing in that moment to go down another.
Big time. Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Because I think, and I love that because there's plenty of those forks, right? And probably I would
Yes.
say
Yeah.
you could grab that fork at about any time, even
Right.
when it feels like it's lost, right?
Right.
But when you can settle and when you can get into that spot where you can say,
Yeah.
okay, I can breathe, I can
Hmm.
settle, I can ground. And I
Hmm.
think that's a part of this whole thing. One of the things I've been gravitating more and more is this idea of mental fitness.
Hmm.
How is it that you are consistently preparing yourself for these moments? Because these moments happen, injury,
Right.
transition, all kinds of things. You have to give me a second. I've got a
That's right. Peter will
little something.
Peter will cut this out right here. No, take your time. I
It's one of those.
I tend to get choked up around good things too, so this is all good.
Oh, there you go. Putting your therapy hat on and everything, Graham. I love it.
Let's
Diving right into the emotion of it, right? Let's go.
let's just breathe.
Right? Yep. Let's just breathe.
Let's
Let's
take the
try and
left
get some
fork in the
breath
road,
in.
not the right. That's right.
Right? I love it. I love it. Yeah. I think I was trying to think of where we left off there as well.
Well, this idea where there is that fork in the road, there are choices along the way that we get to. I think what you're raising that I love is that oftentimes these choices get made unconsciously. We don't know that we're making them.
Yep.
And what you're saying is we're making the unconscious conscious, the whole idea of therapy, therapy, but we can bring this into, any aspect of our lives. And since we're talking about athletes, they can bring it into a conscious awareness of I'm going down this, maybe even this right fork, but along the way, I can be, confronted with a crossroads again. And I get to choose every moment which direction I tend to go. I've got control over that. And if I can effort in the right way, I can transcend this moment into
Yep.
something maybe more resilient, something where I can grow, something where I can be proud of myself.
Yep.
And I can be in this moment in a very different way, even if the moment sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah.
No, right. I
sorry,
absolutely love that.
sorry, sorry. So, Graham, you did a really great job of framing. John, I just want to continue your thought. You were going a little bit on this idea of mental fitness as well, if that helps kind of color this conversation and the
Okay,
question.
Yeah,
perfect.
for sure, right? And I think Graham, what you were speaking to right there, definitely moved into, and in this case, whether it is the mental fitness piece,
Mhm.
right, of this moment that you have to be able to choose that actually exists.
It's almost like you have the emotional muscle that you've built up, that in that challenging moment, I've got the emotional muscle, which translates into my mental fitness to decide rather than to be controlled by, if I hear you right.
You got it. Yeah, right. Like it
That's
is
cool.
something that just as you develop the physical side, right? And this is what I think reached me.
Yeah.
I know it's reached other athletes and, you know, whoever it is that's I think has maybe even an active lifestyle,
Mhm.
there is this idea that you continue to build fitness mentally and emotionally as well. And
Mhm.
how is
Mhm.
it that you do that? I think the word intentional keeps coming
Mhm.
to mind, that you are intentionally building life resilience
Yeah.
versus life hitting you, because life is going to continue to do that. It's going to
Yeah.
continue to hit you in those ways. But if
Right.
you are in that space of continually building intentional life resilience
Yeah.
through mental fitness, then you're talking about some of these practices, breath. How often is it that you are just taking a moment throughout the day to just breathe?
Yeah.
You
Turn that
know,
fight or
to
flight off.
right? Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think you go through it, and in the subconscious you referenced earlier, I don't think we quite know how often we
Yeah.
can transition into overwhelm.
Right.
How often that we function in those moments.
You bet.
And so, that's where mental fitness, I think, has really been something I've just gravitated more and more towards and said, okay, it makes sense that this practice continues to be a part of life. And so, like you were saying, whether it's somebody going into recovery, You
Yeah.
know, like, let's get into what is your practices? You know, what are some of these things that you can establish?
Yeah.
And usually people don't know that they already do this stuff.
Mhm.
You know, in some way, it's highlighting some of the things they already do. I love to
Sure.
start with that. And
Right.
then it's saying, hey, let's bring on some things, you know, that can
Right.
also help to ground you
Yeah.
and be able
So
to then go from there.
I think it's funny. Sometimes people forget that they've survived all their worst days in their lives, and
Yeah.
they've done something to get there. You know,
Yep.
they've been resilient along the way, and there's a strength-based piece to them that they oftentimes forget. And you're
Yep.
talking about here this mental and emotional kind of muscle, this fitness. And I know that when an athlete or a high performer loses their edge, it's not uncommon for doubt to creep in.
Yep.
How do you help folks understand and maybe ideally right size their self-doubt and their recovery process as they're going through it?
Yeah. You know, I think that section of doubt, when doubt kicks in, I think you are looking at the spot where something like the
Hmm,
potential shame can connect to doubt.
good point.
You know, where in that area, doubt itself, I think, is okay. You know,
Hmm.
doubt itself can be natural. You
Yes.
know, there is so much of the process that I have realized is this real separation of when something like shame can then kick in and move everything to a different level. So, you know, this is where a game changer for me was this idea of self-compassion, was this idea of kindness, empathy towards
Mm,
self.
mm,
That it is so impactful and freeing that when you hit doubt, doubt actually stays at doubt.
yeah.
And that's it. And it doesn't move to something like, oh no, I'm doubting myself, my
Right.
ability, my identity, my everything. What it does is it says, oh, I see you,
Yeah.
doubt. I recognize that there's some reality to that doubt. And I can move through that doubt because of the kindness I can show myself, because of what that does, instead of what can be heard is, you know, I've latched on. I'll throw one more kind of model here out there. Just one I've been working with and going through is there's this concept of positive intelligence.
Mm,
Guy by the name of Dr. Shirzad came up with a lot of combinations, but one of the things that he brings is this inner dialogue. I love the way that he brings the idea of we have our judges. Everyone has a judge. We have our own saboteurs, is some
mhm,
of his language as well. And we have the wise voice, the
mm,
sage, that
mm.
is all within us. And the beauty of being able to identify when the judge kicks in, the shame, that's what I think of. When I think judge, I think shame.
Yeah.
And that judge comes in and is really pounding you. And the ability to see it and move towards wisdom and sage instead. And so just recognizing that in those moments that you're talking about, I think that transition is one of the key pieces, that empathy, that kindness towards self that you can really embrace, that sage, you know, that's a part of that process.
This is where I think therapy gets to be so helpful, where sometimes folks don't know what they have access to in these types of things, whether it's something they can learn or whether it's something that's already inside of them that they don't recognize and know that they can tap into at any time in a helpful, in a very helpful way through
Yeah.
moments like this internal dialogue that's taking place. Most of us don't recognize the internal dialogue is so familiar to us, and it happens just that quickly, and it
Yeah.
defines everything. It
Yeah.
makes us better, it makes us worse. It frees us up or gets us stuck, just like you're saying here. And that self-compassion, empathy. And those are words we toss around. They're good words.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? How do we operationalize that in this work? And what you're describing
Mhm.
right here is just that. And I'm curious, as we take those constructs and those concepts there,
Yeah.
uh, what are some of the mental and emotional strategies or maybe ways that you found effective for folks, let's say, going through a recovery process that you maybe have to teach them or help them learn or tap into? Give us
Mhm.
some sense of, for example, you mentioned breath work being one of them, but
Yeah.
take us into others.
Yeah. So if it's kind of leading into post breath work, post grounding, as we're moving into the next step, a lot of it has to do with identifying that dialogue.
Mm.
So there will be exercises that I've run before, and the combination of being able to, mostly people hear the judge really clearly.
Oh
They
yeah.
know that one right away. So I've done some exercises in regards to let's get to know. Let's get to know whether it is, in this case, being able to hear that harmful dialogue.
Right.
Because I think what I've seen is, if you can acknowledge it and if you can identify it, then you can change it. If you can't, then we're talking, we still need to breathe, right? We still need to center, right? We still need to get to that place of being able to say, hey, there it is, right there. With the idea of, and in this case, maybe judge or harsh critic in life, one of the things I've seen very impactful is the separation of that you are not that judge. A lot of
Mm.
people in their language will come to me and speak about I keep speaking to myself this way, right? I
Yeah.
keep sharing, I keep talking about myself this way. And what that means to be able to next step, take that and separate it.
Yeah.
Be able to say, hey, like, wait a second, let's pause that and let's recognize that could be harmful anxiety talking to you.
Mhm.
That could be harmful depression talking to you. That
Yeah.
could be some of these other, components talking to you in that way. Because I believe that you're different. I believe that
You bet.
you have that wisdom. You have that beauty. You have that strength. You have that resilience that is within you.
You're really
So that would,
introducing, yeah, in those moments, you're really introducing folks to a part of themselves that, while they may have tapped into to a degree in their sport, but you're introducing just a whole nother dimension of themselves that they may or not be that aware, but they can really grow and use, kind of maybe in that sage type way you talked about earlier, to
yep,
really walk them through various aspects of their life.
yeah.
Yeah, really
Yeah,
like
no,
that.
it's one of those that I think, combining with what I have learned with the ability to ground, and that's kind of the trauma background,
Mm-hmm.
being able to move somebody and being able to help them, move to a place of grounding that then can identify that inner dialogue. I
Yeah,
think that's
really.
probably some
Yeah.
of the, the big work, that happens, in those moments. And when you're talking preparing for recovery, when you're talking about preparing for life transition, and that process and what that looks like, being
Mm-hmm.
able to identify that dialogue and be able to switch it, and interact with it differently, I think is
Yeah.
huge.
Well, let's transition into transition. This idea that, there are many seasons of
Yeah.
an athlete's life, and that at some point one's identity through the athletic lens has to change. All good things come to an end, at some point. And an end doesn't mean necessarily, it has to be tragic. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's injury related. Sometimes it's just time. Sometimes it's
Yep.
just an aging process, or maybe a change in one's focus or priorities. And
Yeah.
how do you? What are some of the challenges you actually have provided the transition curve bridge that kind of
Hmm.
walks through a visual? Walk us through some of the ways that you help athletes right size and properly name some of the
Hmm.
inherent challenges in the
Yeah.
transition process, and how you walk them through that.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think, with that transition model,
Yeah,
that's been one, I've just always appreciated something that I can see, that I can
yeah,
visualize, and that I can also use and say, hey, like, let's take a look at this, because the conceptual piece of it can be so overwhelming, confusing. There's a lot to it. And, with the idea of that transition model or that transition curve, I think there's two pieces that I find myself as a therapist in. One is usually that beginning, and
yeah.
the term is kind of used as an ending.
Mm,
That ending that's there is really that letting go. And I think it's really the mourning process, the
you bet.
grief
Mm,
process that you are walking through. So part of that is really being able to get into that space and say, hey, like, we need to sit with this a little bit.
Mm.
You are in, and I think this is where I was really helpful to go through the difference between maybe injury and that being an event versus this being a process, and being able
Yes.
to kind of reset the expectations a little bit here and say, hey, we're going to be in a process here. This is big. This involves a lot to be
Yeah.
able to move through. And first is really this grieving section. There is this spot where you're going to walk through grief symptoms, mourning symptoms, and that's a whole slew, right? Like there's a lot that's there. And so I find myself first being able to share that, being able to sit with that grieving process. Sometimes it's run through a little bit of Kubler-Ross, right? Run through the stages and the steps, of what that looks like. Being able to then get to some of this place of, acceptance, and what that looks like. And then there's this curve portion that happens. And I think in the model itself, you'll see this place, ditch of doubt, I believe is what it's called.
I
And to
like
take a
that.
second there, but ditch of doubt comes in. And, it's similar to what we were talking about earlier, right, Graham? Like that spot where, you can
Right.
move through that doubt, or you can get stuck. And so if you, see again in that kind of transition curve there, there's a cycle, right? And that's that cycle that you could possibly get stuck.
Yeah.
So there is, right? In those moments, there's a lot that can come up. And I think it also provides a lot of opportunity for
Mm.
change. In some of the grief work that I've done, one of the things that I recognize is grief just changes you.
You bet.
There is no question that as you
It,
walk through it, you're going to change.
and ideally, it broadens us.
Yeah.
Yeah. We
Yep.
become even
Right. Beautifully
we
said. Yep.
we become even more buffed out, if you will.
Yep.
We become fuller. I guess it's the whole resiliency.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literature and support, and I think your message is a positive one, that we get to grow through these times
Mm-hmm.
if we choose and learn how and focus on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. That we become intentional,
There
about
we go.
it, and I think that is the beauty of something like, therapy. I'll say it, a decent amount to my clients, but you showing up
Yeah.
is a victory in itself. You
You
being
bet.
here, whether it's on screen, you have intentionally carved this time
Yeah.
to sit with, move through, whatever it is that's coming up for you. And in this specific space, when it comes to transition, being able to identify that doubt,
Yeah.
sometimes being able to identify that stuck, that
Yeah.
overwhelmed, to then be able to move through that. Um, I've appreciated, I think, just the idea of movement, and what it means to just keep moving.
Yeah.
I'll throw another personal piece, and this is, one of those things is as I actually just finished a triathlon this last weekend. It's one of the things that keeps me going.
Nice.
It's something I stumbled upon and years ago, and just kind of love it. And at the same time, every time I get towards the end, I find myself going, I got to keep moving. I just can't. Like, this is unreal right now. And my body is screaming at me
Oh
saying, no,
man.
what are you doing? And I'm at the place of, I just got to keep moving, and
Oh
it's a personal experience for me. It's one of those. And, I think I take that as well into something like this, especially
yeah.
grief, especially ditch of doubt, the moments of avoidance, the times you can get stuck in that cycle, upwards to, what that can lead to, the opportunity, like you said, I was beautifully said, Graham, in the sense of building, right? And
Mm.
what it means to expand, and
Mm.
really, increase, that resilience and experiences in life.
Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing those. Oftentimes, we'll ask for a hallmark story, but in reality, you're kind of our hallmark story on the show. What you've done, with your injury. You've taken your injury and you've kind of sublimated all the energy and opportunities and channeled it into a wonderful career that helps folks journey through probably a lot of what you had to journey through, and to really facilitate a growth process for them that you are a model of. And I know, we're talking today about athletes and high performers dealing with injury and recovery and transitioning into a new identity. But these same concepts, when you think about them, they apply to everybody going through life. So if you would, as we begin to kind of wind down for today, give our listeners a takeaway message about dealing with adversity, growing through hard times, and about life being a series of transitions that we actually get to be a part of, be intentional about, like you said, and grow from.
Yeah. I think there's probably two that I'll share that, again, I think I just share them a lot personally. This is what I walk through, as well as to clients and what that means. I might have dropped this one in the earlier podcast as well, but it's one that stuck with me, is the idea that you are a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That one spoke to me in the performance piece. When coming from an all or nothing perspective, that I have to continue to grow, I have to continue to do these things, meant that I was not a masterpiece, or feeling like maybe I was at a masterpiece moment, then I would stop growing. But just recognizing that they coexist, they need to be together. And it was such a powerful message when I heard that one. And so I hope to lay that one out there. The other one I would throw out there is the ability to be curious without judgment. Stay curious, in regards to, your journey. Stay curious, ask the questions as much as you can without, whether it's the judge, inner critic, those things. But being able to do that within kindness and empathy, I think, is a lifelong practice that
That's good.
I continue to hone and continue to walk through. But
that's good,
man. Those
are great takeaways.
Yeah.
I'm a masterpiece, but I'm also a work in progress. And let's be curious about our lives without having to bring any judgment, or that critic, like you talked about earlier, doesn't have to be there. And we get to free ourselves from that lie that we oftentimes believe falsely and unfortunately. Jon, I would love our listeners to be able to follow up with you after today's show. And would you please give us the best ways for them to contact you?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, a couple of ways. I've got some access on my website, which is jonsteeletherapy.com. Another one, I'm on Facebook at Jon Steele LMFT. And then as well, LinkedIn, same, Jon Steele LMFT. If it's helpful, Jon for me is spelled Jon. In that way. And
we're not going to put any Tommy in front of that, Jon. We're not going to put any Tommy in front of that, Jon.
Just, you can bring up my trauma, Graham. You're going to bring up my trauma. Come on.
But you already passed through it, man. You're way above it.
I tell myself that, right? No, it's true. I appreciate that. But those would be right. Those would be some of the ways to contact me. And then contact info is listed on the website as well. Got email address and phone number that's listed there to be able to take a look at. But
outstanding. JONSTEELE. Very good. Well, Jon, man, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. It's been a great time with you, and I appreciate all you're contributing to us. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Graham. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, brother. I also want to thank you, our listeners, for dropping by and joining Jon and me today. It's always great to have you with us as well. Regarding our episode today, I want to remind you that it and an archive of all of our other episodes and resource materials can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. Thanks again for being with us on this show, and we'll look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.